Yeah, I think both of the things that you shared, they hit it quite nicely. So a PM toolbox on the one hand is just the set of the tools that you can use in your daily work as a product manager. So for example, if I want to run a sprint planning with my engineers, I will have the agenda readily in my toolbox that I can just copy and paste and fill. Or list of access codes if I, or there's a question in the chat about recording the webinar. I'll let Sumit handle that. I'll just continue. Yeah, a list of accesses like. Sorry. Okay, I'll just continue. In terms of list of accesses, you probably use a lot of tools, analytic tools, but also other things that you need in your daily life. So just a repository of all the accesses, so you never have to think about where they're stored, or new people joining the team, they can easily get started on their own. You might have your strategy documents in there. So what we like to use at Fave is a product narrative. So when we have like our products are already a couple of years old, but they're still following the same strategy. So this is nicely written down in a 1-page or 2-pager, and everyone can have easily access to it. Recommended readings, that's something that helped me a lot when I first started as a product manager. My predecessor just gave me a bunch of books and said, I know you're not a product manager, read those books, and then at least in theory, you're a product manager. Analytics tools, also dashboards, maybe even reports that you guys have run, and basically numerical insights that are also important for understanding your product or how you're doing right now. And of course, your product requirement documents, your main tool on how you communicate the requirements, what you're working on with engineers, etc. Communication tools, I think it's kind of a no-brainer, saying, oh, we use WhatsApp, or we use Slack, or we use email. But I think what's important is actually specifying which communication tools to use, and maybe who in the company uses which communication tools. So for example, in my case, if I want to communicate to engineers, I reach them in Slack 100% of the time. If I G-chat them, I will never get an answer. However, if I want to talk to my marketing manager and I Slack them, I will never get a reply. I need to G-chat them. Some people work better in WhatsApp, and then there's also sort of communication rules or expectations that can also be listed there. So overall, the PM toolbox over-encompassing is just generally a list of all the tools and all the things that you need to keep in mind when you work as a product manager. But yeah, after this short intro, let's just align on the goals of the session. So at the end, I think what you will learn is you will know what's the PM toolbox and understand the importance of it. You should also be able to build the PM toolbox by yourself, as well as evaluate the needs for the PM toolbox in your organization. What that means is basically there's like 3 levels of different goals. Now we've done introduction, we kind of know, we already checked that off. What is a PM toolbox? But then next, we'll talk a little bit about how can you actually build it yourself, and then lastly, even discuss what will it need to bring a PM toolbox in your organization. But then maybe you guys also have any other expectations. So here we can also take a minute for any one of you to write in the chat or unmute yourself if there's anything else that you want me to consider or go into as we move along.
So I would like to say, can we also get some of the free resources, like you were telling me the name of a couple of resources? Would you also just name of a couple of few free resources which we can use on our own if we are not having like much of licenses our company supports for each of the tool, like for communication, for project management, and all those things?
Yeah, I can give some examples. I didn't specifically list them in the slides, but maybe, yeah, I will mention them, and maybe in the end in the Q&A, I can also help you write some of them down in the chat. I hope that'll help. But maybe it's one expectation from us to level your expectations. I'm not going to go into specifics of, well, how do you build your PRD? It's more conceptually, how do you structure your toolbox? But then at the end of the session, you should have a good overview of what are the kind of things that should be in toolbox. And then you can just use Google and find the best practices templates for whatever is in there. That's usually how I go about it. Cool. Then moving on, I think what's very important is that a toolbox can take very different shapes and forms depending on what your job description or your scope of responsibility is. So let's start with the associate product manager. That's someone who's still in a junior role. Your main goal is to learn what it means to be a product manager, learn the ropes, and understand what your unique product management style is. And at this point, you probably don't have your own product management team yet. You're probably working with a more seasoned product manager who's mentoring you, and you kind of contribute to whatever product that team is working on. One of the key things that you need to understand as a product manager is there might be a toolbox already. So the tools set by the organization, and you will probably follow them in the beginning. So that should, even if it's not organized, like in my case, there was no product management toolbox, but there was like an onboarding package, and it did mention a lot of things. So then basically what I did is I just organized it into a toolbox following a specific structure. And then that kind of served as my cheat sheet in the first 90 days, where whenever I was not sure how does something work in this company, or how do I do this, how do I do that, then I just had a cheat sheet, and I could know that I'm not missing out on any step. Like when I'm planning my sprint, I'm doing my sprint planning, what are the things that I need to talk about? Just check there, check, done, good. I don't have to feel anxious that I'm missing out on something obvious. And I think then the next point would be after you've used the toolbox for a little bit, you kind of understand what works for you and what does not work. And I think at this point, you would actually start building your own PM toolbox. Like, oh, I followed this sprint planning framework, but actually it doesn't really match my style as a product manager, and that's completely fine. Like everyone has their own working styles, and I think it's important about understanding what are the things that you can adjust, what you can play with, and then kind of set a track record of what does work for you. And then lastly, identifying opportunities that you are actually lacking. So that could be, you look at the PM toolbox and you go through all the things that are there, and you can mentally check for yourself, oh, I know this, but I don't know this. And then you can start training yourself on that, going into that. So that's actually how you can identify the opportunities that you have for your growth as a product manager. For example, if your goal is to go from associate product manager to product manager, you can use your toolbox to kind of understand where you can still improve on. And that then allows you actually to properly prepare going into new situations and new experiences in your job. Like if you get a new opportunity managing a new project or product that you haven't had before, then basically just making sure your toolbox is 100% complete. Then you will not miss out on anything. You're one of these few people that come prepared into every single situation that might come, and then you're completely set up for success and nothing should go wrong. From there, moving into being a product manager. So at this point, you probably already have your own engineering team. And that can bring a lot of different responsibilities depending on how your organization works, how much developer interaction is expected from you. For example, in my case at Fave, we do practice Agile, but we don't necessarily have a Scrum Master or an Agile practitioner. That responsibility is kind of split between me and my engineering lead. And together we basically set up, oh, you guys cannot see anything?
Yeah, the slides are not showing up. So
oof. Since the beginning or only now?
It's from the beginning. So
oof.
I'm wondering when do you move in? So we just take a quick rundown on that. We see it now.
Yes. So I think, yeah, all my nice animations you guys didn't see. So here I was talking about myself a little bit. Then we were covering what is the PM toolbox. We were talking about the goals that we want to achieve. And if you guys have any other expectations for associate product managers, using your PM toolbox as a cheat sheet for yourself, using it to build your track record and to identify new opportunities. And then you are able to set yourself up for success. At this point, we are where we just stopped at. So I think to continue. So sorry for that. I didn't realize. I think I was sharing.
We missed the slides.
Yeah,
it was awesome. We missed it.
But now you can see everything, right?
Yeah, we can see. Yeah.
Perfect. So as a product manager, you would use your toolbox differently as maybe an associate product manager. because at first you were kind of using it as a cheat sheet for yourself, but now it becomes a knowledge center for everyone in your team, like your engineering team, maybe the associate product managers that work with you, and to ensure that everyone has access to the same tools and knowledge. So this is where then you would put your PRDs that you share with the engineering team. If you gain any insights, if you do a customer analysis, or if you do customer interviews, all these kind of things you put there in one place so that everyone that you work with kind of knows this is where I have to go to if I want to find something. This helps you kind of break silos in your organization and within, also between you and your team, so that they don't feel that you are that they're just the engineers who have to deliver, and you're kind of the product manager who holds all the information. It becomes more collaborative. Then, as I was sharing, the lead engineer and we usually try to identify where are opportunities for improvement. And whenever we want to change our working style, how we work with the engineering team, then we actually come up with a new process and we immediately change it in the toolbox. Because let's say, oh, you start introducing a retro at the end of every sprint, or you change your sprint duration from 1 week to 2 weeks. But then you don't change it in your toolbox and all the documentation, then there's kind of a disparity between what is practiced and what is documented. And that will make it harder for, if like you get a new engineer joining your team or a new product manager, so just make sure that you change it there as well. Because as soon as you write it down, that becomes reality, and then don't have to worry about it anymore, and your change management will be accelerated. And then lastly, just like as an associate product manager, for you as a product manager, again, it's helping you identify opportunities, but in this case, areas where your product is actually lacking. So and then you look at what are all the things in my toolbox that I'm supposed to do, or I'm supposed to have a North Star because I have my North Star template for my product, but actually we haven't looked at setting a North Star metric for our product. And then you realize, oh, maybe that's something I should do. Or A/B testing. If you put your A/B testing framework in your toolbox and you realize, oh, but we're actually not doing A/B testing, and it's something that you can look at. And then that will help you setting up your product for success. And then lastly, after being a product manager, you might become senior product manager or anything above head of product, principal product manager, VP of product, whatever. At this point, you're not only managing one product or one engineering team, but actually you're responsible for a whole portfolio. And there might be multiple product managers below you. At this point, you start working much more with senior stakeholders and C-level. So your toolbox, being a knowledge center, becomes more and more important. So now you're probably going to have information there that not only your engineering team, but everyone in the organization should have access to. So it still serves the same purpose, but then you're able to scale the information that you put in your toolbox to different teams. And that's where you kind of can lead the conversation of different topics and different issues that your organization has. And that also will allow you to broaden your scope of the toolbox on how you interact with stakeholders. Because if you then put tools in there on how, I don't know, you can run a collaborative meeting. For example, with our product design team, we like to run sprints, design sprints to basically when we do discovery for new products. But actually the sprint, design sprint framework or lightning decision jam or any other human-centered design methodology can also be used by other teams when they want to tackle problems that they have internally. So then you'll actually teach other people in the organization the kind of skills and tools that you as a product manager have at your disposal and bring it to other teams and kind of preaching product leadership in that way. And then, of course, you also identify areas in your organization, again, that are lacking, that are currently lacking, and you consciously can plan for its growth. So not only for your product, but actually how your product ties in with the overall business strategy, how well, for example, if that's outside of your scope, or how well the business people are actually able to onboard your new partners, and all of that can then become part of your scope as soon as you put it in your toolbox and you kind of stand in for it. And how you can do that, we can talk about a little bit later. But then in the end, what you do is you move towards a product-driven company. And I think that's kind of the goal of every product manager, that they're able to build a product-driven company to become like, I don't know, your Airbnb or your Grab or all these kind of big companies that really put value on product, and that has brought them to success. So I think at this point, we talked a lot. So I'm just going to show you what a PM toolbox can actually look like. Because now with all these concepts and frameworks, you probably think it's going to be something super crazy, super big and amazing. But actually, it's just in the current state, it's just a Dropbox document that has a few simple columns, like category. What is it? Is it for collaboration, data analysis, design? Then what's the purpose? What is the platform? The access credentials, how-tos, and whom to ask for tips, like who is basically spearheading each and every initiative. So I think that's good to get started. Definitely Fave is not at the level that I was showing for a product-driven company. So our toolbox can also definitely improve. And at that point, you might actually have a multi-structure kind of, like multi-folders kind of structures. But I think what's important for you is if you want to get started, you don't have to, it doesn't need to be fancy. All it needs to be is to get the job done. If you try to make it super fancy and hard to use, then people will not adopt it. And you want to make adoption as easy as possible. And for that, you also put stuff like credentials and whom to reach out in case they have any questions, as well as how-tos there. And making looking up as easy as possible to make it easy to filter, to search, and all of that kind of stuff. Put it in places where people will naturally go. Like, I don't know if you have a company-wide Dropbox, put it in the first folder or something like that. And then obviously make it easy for people to understand, but also where or how they can contribute. And I think one thing that I like to do, especially for adoption, is actually whenever I do anything, like, I don't know, I give a presentation on how we tackle this specific problem, I make it a point to mention where the PM toolbox helped me in achieving what I achieved. Like, oh, I use this framework and you can find it here. And I think then setting yourself up for success on how your PM toolbox can be successful. So now this is how Fave's toolbox looks like. But, sorry, wanted to drive one more point home. In the end, your toolbox should become an extension of your brain, because as a product manager, we have to know so many frameworks and need to know to apply them all the time. Like even the most seasoned product manager will forget how specifically you do something. So then you don't have to carry all that information. Your brain kind of becomes a repository where you just know, oh, I want to do this. Where do I find it? In my PM toolbox, I look it up. This is how I do it. So you can save yourself a lot of headspace that you can use for more useful information.
Laurin, can you give a small sneak peek into the PM toolbox again? I think.
Yeah, sure. I mean, feel free to take a screenshot, and I think you will also send out the slides. This is, of course, not everything. That's just the first fold, just more like a representation.
Blurry. I was wondering if you could just do a full screen on this. Is it possible on the browser?
Wait to find it. Full screen is here. Yes.
This is a lot clearer. Shishti, you dropped a message saying that it's not clear. I hope it's showing up on your side. We'll definitely be sharing the screens.
Yeah. The slides there. Then you should be fine then. Okay. Just go back into my setup. Okay. Present a view. Okay. Good. Moving on. At this point, from what I heard before, there's actually already some active product managers in the group here who are joining here. So maybe you guys can also share if anything that you heard now, are you doing it differently? What does your PM toolbox like? I think some experience sharing, because obviously Fave is one company, but there are many different ways on how you can do it. So yeah, maybe whoever wants to share, if anything you agree with or you don't agree with, anything you do differently, we'd be happy to hear.
Laurin, if there is no toolbox or something, so you created a new one, but in an established company, there will be some set of tools being used already.
Yeah.
Right? So as a PM, we have to get adapted to it like as soon as possible. That's what they expect to. That is one thing. And one more thing is, apart from these things, there are other things also, like let's take OKR. Some companies do follow OKR and some companies do not follow OKR. So do you have anything to tell if a PM is moving to a company where there is OKR is followed, and he doesn't know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So a few things. So OKR framework is definitely something I would put into my PM toolbox. Even if currently the company is not following it, I think there is a lot of merits of following it, and that can actually be an opportunity where you can upscale, like where you can improve your organization by saying, oh, I want to follow OKRs. Or similarly, it could also be, oh, we don't have North Star framework and I think I want to implement it. So definitely I would put it in the toolbox, even though we are not practicing it, just to kind of give awareness. And for your first point about you join a new company and there's kind of set of tools. So I think for the first 90 days, you should probably just follow them and learn how to use them. And that's actually where I then built my toolbox, because it was all over the place. Like some credentials were in a Slack message, some credentials were here and there. It was very hard for me to get started as a new product manager. So I kind of first built it for myself, and nobody told me to do it. But then I was just, someone was asking me how to do something. Someone else who joined a product management team after me. And then I just shared my personal toolbox with them, and they're like, oh, hey, this is great. You should share it with more people. And then I kind of made it official. And it's not like my manager didn't tell me, oh, hey, we need a PM toolbox. I think you should create one. It's more like I took the initiative, and then it was a good improvement that the company actually needed.
Nice. Laurin, can we make it full screen and go back to the PM toolbox screen? Unless if you have more slides in this one.
I do have more slides actually. Not many, just 3 slides, I think.
So let's move forward that, because I think
yeah.
you have a hard stop as well.
Yeah. So I think the last 2 points that I want to make is the question that people ask often is, how do you structure your PM toolbox? Because as I shared earlier, you don't want it to just, you want it to be as easy accessible and as easy to understand and get started, as well as to contribute. So you want to follow some structure. So I can just present the one that I started at first. So I just mapped out our product development flow that we follow in Fave. So whenever I talk to other people about what stage a certain feature or product is in, we use these kind of words. So discovery basically is understanding the problem space that you're in. Then design is making the prototypes, validating the prototypes. Development is building your first version, second version, third version. QA is basically just testing it before it goes into production. Launching is when you work with the marketing team to build kind of your go-to-market strategy, and then you iterate. And each of these different parts in the product development lifecycle actually need different tools. So in your discovery, you have your PRD templates. Maybe you use the design sprint, you do a SWOT analysis, all kind of different things, like endless things. Then again, design, you probably have the kind of tools that you use with your designers. And I don't know, our Figma has 100 different projects, and it's very hard to click through Figma. So there's probably a repository organized by product where you can find the designs. I think one of the main interaction I have with stakeholders is the question, where can I find the prototype? Which is very useless. They don't need to reach out to me on WhatsApp to find a prototype. Development, kind of what are the best practices for sprint planning, retros, how does bug escalation work? That's something that I always find iffy. If I know there's a bug at midnight, we actually have it very clearly written out. In what case can I wake up a developer, in what case not? So that's also quite helpful. Then QA, basically if you're involved in test cases or QA timeline, how do you plan that? How do you write that out? Launching, you have your GTM plan, tracking frameworks. Oh, there's a duplicate, sorry. But basically launching is tracking. How do you track? Like if you have CleverTab or Amplitude or any other platform, kind of how does our tracking framework work? How do you implement it? And then what can you do afterwards once you're launched? How do you analyze the success of your product? And then lastly, what kind of things can you use to understand how do you further iterate the product? So it's very much along the product development lifecycle. The advantage of this one is it's quite easy to understand, super simple, but the disadvantage is you're actually missing out a lot of the responsibilities of a product manager. This is only focusing on product delivery, which, as you can see in my next framework, is only one small part of the whole thing that you want to do. So at Fave, we follow a product management growth competency framework, very long word. Basically, it's based on the 3 Ps of organizational success that probably you guys also know: product, process, and people. And then what we kind of done a while back actually is just identify the different areas of competency in each of them. So we have in product a few, process a few, people a few. I don't necessarily have to go into each one of them, but I think the main point that I want to drive home here is that before, in the framework before, it was all based on process. But then you have product, like understanding how does the business work, what's the strategy, how does the user customer centricity work, what kind of market insights do you currently have in your company that are, I don't know, inside or in marketing that would also be quite interesting for you as a product manager to know, or domain knowledge that you might be lacking. If you join a payments company without being a payments product manager, how do you kind of get that knowledge? But that's still very product centric. And I think if you want to go from a associate product manager to later senior product manager, what's the hardest actually, or what I found the hardest for myself or peers, is understanding how you can be better in the people aspect. Like what kind of tools do you actually need for collaboration or stakeholder management? Because that one is not very, usually it's not very concrete. It's like, oh, you need to be able to influence your stakeholder to make sure that they drive the decisions that you want to implement. But how do you actually do that? So I think that also requires a whole different session. But again, as I was telling you before, how do you use the toolbox to grow yourself, your product, or your organization, the people part is actually where you really need to put time into and understand how can you drive these competencies. But I would not necessarily advise to start building your toolbox following all of these boxes, because it's quite a lot, and it can become you will lose the overview quite fast. So what we've done at Fave is actually just highlight. We did a small exercise understanding which of these boxes we are lacking in. So like, oh, we understand that usually it's very hard for us to align stakeholders. So then we actually divided and conquered and said, okay, let's build our toolbox for stakeholder management. Then we found tools that we can actually use, like alignment meetings, regular check-ins, sprint reviews, inviting stakeholders there, and these kind of things. So I think, basically the main point is make it as simple as possible, but don't limit yourself to opportunities that you can look into. Yeah, and then I think how I would like to end and the discussion that we can have, of course, you can ask me more questions, but then also if you were to implement this, what I just told, like set up a PM toolbox in your organization or scale it, how would you actually do it? I think that can be a good question for you to also reflect as we finish up this webinar. And yeah, thanks a lot for attending. And I think now I'm happy to move into any slide and answer the questions that you guys have. And Sumit, maybe you can help me moderate what kind of questions are in the chat, because if I leave it full screen, I cannot see the chat.
Absolutely, don't worry about that. Thanks so much for this one. Maybe you want to go back to how it looks like, how the entire PM toolbox looks like, and if you can talk about a few tools, what you started off with, what kind of tools would you want to set up for anyone who's getting started into product management, maybe, for example? What kind of would you want to get started, and where exactly? Because a lot of times what happens is that when somebody gets into a job and now he is bombarded with all the information in one place, and more often than not, this information is coming to us in email. Not many companies, not many organizations are really following a structured Google Drive kind of a process. It might just come on Slack or WhatsApp or Telegram. Now, how do you kind of start to assimilate that process? What kind of questions to ask to your team or to your manager while you get started on this particular piece? And if there is a flow in which you want to break down the development of the product toolbox itself, that would be interesting to take your look on.
Yeah. So I think the main thing is to understand what the state of product is in that you're going to be managing. Like it will be the process would probably be very different if you're tasked to start a new product from zero, or if you're going to jump into an existing product that is already late in the life cycle and is iterating. But I think, how you should get started is probably understanding what is the scope of your responsibilities. You know, when you apply for a job, there's always these different lines that you're supposed to do, or perform data analysis or collaborate with stakeholders. I think this can serve as a good kind of groups or key categories that you get started in. And then for each of them, you should identify who's kind of the expert in your company for that. If you have someone who's very good in data analysis, for example, if you have a data team, you shouldn't actually rely on the product managers to teach you data analysis, but the data people, because they can give you extra tools that other people in your organization, in the product organization, probably don't even have. And then you can actually become very good in that very fast. Or when it comes to go to market, find your peer person in the marketing team. And for the more product related things, there will also be the kind of stars in certain aspects in your organization. It could be your manager or other principal product managers, but probably you usually look for higher seniority above you, because they should be more seasoned in the company. And then, yeah, you just start putting it together. Whenever you hear something new, you learn something new, you don't only put it in your notebook or in your own notes, but you actually put it in your toolbox immediately.
Interesting. Guys, any questions that you may have for Laurin before he drops off? He does have a hard stop.
Hi, Laurin.
Hey.
Hi. So, like, I really liked your whole presentation and specifically the designs and all. So, it was really enriching experience. So, I just have one question that, like, whenever, is there any incident like you had in your career that you had to switch to different PM tools? Just give me one, like, if anything that happened to you, that you mentioned that some of the PM tools work from some people, some product managers, and some don't. So I would like to have some incident if you have.
Yeah, the switching actually can happen from for a lot of different reasons. I've had a few. The reasons are very different, so I can maybe just give a few examples. But the cost of switching is very high. Like, people will inherently not want to change. So there really needs to be a trade-off for switching. So one that I can share on is, as you can see, we use paper. I really don't like Dropbox paper. I don't know, it's very bad in my opinion. There's so much better, cheaper alternatives. One of them being Coda, or one of them being Notion. And I really want to change. But just because I like it more and it's a little bit cheaper, it does not offset the cost of switching. So there's, because everyone already has accounts and there's a lot of data, that a lot of stuff in there that you would have to migrate, we actually didn't do it. Another example where we went ahead with switching one of our tools in the toolbox, that was in our engagement, one of our engagement tools. We used to use Intercom for our customer support, but also for a lot of data analytics and email, as well as messaging automation. So it was kind of a shared tool between customer support, marketing, and product, but definitely part of the product toolbox as well. And I think it was in 2017 or 18 where they changed their pricing structure, where for a lot of their clients, the price increased like 10 or 100-fold, because they basically changed from based on per session to based on per seats. And then it was out of our budget suddenly, and then we needed to find a different tool. Like, we just researched competitors and looked for which ones to change. And then the last situation that we're looking at Fave right now is our email marketing, email automation solution. We are currently assessing between two, the current one that we're using, and then there's a competitor who really wants to have our business. And here also you have different kind of trade-offs versus what kind of price they're going to give you, but also kind of features and how much it will take to migrate. Because if you think about marketing automation, it's deeply ingrained in your product's backend. Like, the engineers set up the APIs to work with it, and switching will actually take months or very long. So these are kind of things that you have to consider.
All right. Thank you so much.
I have one question, which I think at a senior level I've been struggling with, and that's one thing which is about the stakeholder management piece, right? And that's not something which a lot of people have spoken about, talked about, written about. and mostly you're kind of, left in front of these CEOs, especially the CFO, and who's only talking about numbers, and he's a bad guy in the room. What kind of tools, what kind of practices, how can that help me? How can a toolbox like this help me position myself purely to do the stakeholder management and do relationship management for the CXO lobbies?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because usually, I mean, you cannot just find a framework and be like, oh, how do I communicate with CFOs? Because every situation will be probably quite different. So what I do is actually of course, I basically have my experience that I cannot put in the toolbox. But additionally, what I do have in my toolbox is kind of not cases. I think the best word I can think of is cases. It's like, oh, where are we at? For example, I want to set my roadmap, and it's very much dependent on the C-level input. So I don't want to just book a meeting and be like all out, hey, how do we plan our roadmap? But actually, what is the kind of meeting structure that you need to get the desired outcome? And then based on the outcomes that I want, or based on the situation that I'm in, then I have kind of different agendas or different frameworks that I can actually look at. That actually, I mean, communication is a whole different session that I could also speak probably an hour about. But inside my communication, how I do communication, one tool that I use is a change management plan. So that's like, you have your ACTA or other kind of change management frameworks that you can find online that have different goals. One is to align stakeholders. One is maybe if you want to launch a new feature, how do you plan your communication? And then you can sort of perform a stakeholder analysis and give the different communication style and desires and fears of each stakeholder, and then kind of plan your communication on a timeline. So if I want to launch a new product and I know it's very hard to convince stakeholders, then I can plan at each and every point, when do I need to communicate what, when, how, and to whom. Yeah.
Interesting. We do have Rico here from Tokopedia. I'm not sure, Rico, you want to share some from your experience? How do you guys manage it in Toko?
Yep. Can you specific which one that you referring to?
The overall product management process, maybe, if you have something like a toolbox like this.
Yeah, actually, we have this kind of just a sort of toolbox like this. We do have a Confluence for the knowledge management, and we put all the documents there. The technical requirements, the product requirements, we put it on our Confluence. And for product developments, we adopt Agile Scrum. So we use Jira for task distributions and to monitor the burn down. That's what we have for Tokopedia. And for designing the wireframe or the prototype, we use Figma. We used to have Zeppelin, but now we moved to Figma. I think the design team find it more, I don't know, maybe cheaper, or maybe it's more effective to design the prototype. So I think that's all we have from at Tokopedia.
Okay. That's nice. Yes, I know Laurin has a hard stop. He has to rush out for a friend's birthday party.
Yeah.
We'll have more questions. I'll probably share. So Laurin, you can share the link of the deck and maybe your email ID if people who want to connect with you separately. Brainstorm a bit. We can possibly do that.
And also note it down right now. If you want, you can connect with me on LinkedIn or write me an email, drop me an email. And yeah, I'll share the, do you want me to put it in the chat now or just send it to you and you send it around later?
You can send it to me. I'll send it out later.
Yeah, perfect. Then we'll do that.
Maybe that would be helpful.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Laurin.
Nice speaking to you. See you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
See you, Laurin. Bye.
Bye.